And now we're going to talk about dopamine. Dopamine is a drug that people think is something to do with happy. Perhaps it's something to do with pleasure. In fact, it's none of those. It is the seeking of pleasure, but it brings no happiness. So dopamine is an interesting drug. It's actually a foraging and motivation drug. Dopamine is sourced from the primary drug L-dopa, the same place that epinephrine comes from. So epinephrine and dopamine generally tail together. What that means is when you wake up in the morning and you've got those high levels of epinephrine, you'll generally, depending on your good night's sleep, you'll have high levels of dopamine. So not only have you got the energy, you've now got the motivation to go foraging. So it's a forward-moving drug. It's a drug that you need in your body to drive you forward in search of things. But it's become the drug that sends us forward searching for pleasure. And there's very little happiness in the continuous search for pleasure. It's got some great things. It's to do with our movement. So people with Parkinson's have low levels of dopamine. So it's a really good drug for us. We need it. It's great to do with motivation and around the focus. And when we're working on something, we need the right levels of dopamine to keep us engaged. But it's also really addictive. In fact, it's more addictive than alcohol and nicotine. So what that means is that we have got a generation of children, a generation of teenagers and young people, and in fact, old people as well, who we're just driven by the search for more of. I call it the more of drug, where I call norepinephrine the what if drug. Dopamine is the more of drug, the more drug. I'm searching for more. I want more of something. So if we look at the board, we'll see that dopamine is released not only in anticipation of something, when we're actually having it or consuming it, and then wanting us to repeat the action. So when you think of your life, think about a bar of chocolate. Think about a tub of ice cream. Are you one of those weird people, no disrespect, who can just eat one square of chocolate and put it away? I'm not. I'm all things excessive. So dopamine for me is once I've had a couple of squares of chocolate, I sit in front of the couch, and this is what dopamine is, and you'll know her now. She'll be very intimate in your life. You're sitting in front of TV, you've had a big dinner, you're completely replete. There is no need for any more anything in your life. Yet something just drives you off the couch, and you walk into the fridge, you walk into the kitchen, you open the fridge door or the pantry door, and you just stare to see if there's anything that you can just shove into your mouth. Serves no purpose. You just want to put more of it in your mouth. That's dopamine. That's not you with no self-control. That is the power of dopamine. She will drive you and you will seek. And in fact, dopamine's called the teaching drug. And what she does, she's really clever. She partners things. So if I said hamburger, what would you have with a hamburger? Generally Coke and a hamburger and chips. I'd say beer and you might say nuts. If I say wine, I'd certainly say cheese. So what she does is she partners you with one thing with another so that she gets double the dose. There's dopamine receptors in our mouth and there's dopamine receptors in our stomachs. And what happens is that in anticipation, the body will start to release dopamine and go, cup of tea coming, I think you should have a biscuit with that. And so there's this constant drive to add but wait, there's more. And that's what dopamine does. Now, dopamine's really interesting. There's a book called Dopamine Nation. I've written it on the board for you, Dr. Anna Lembke. Incredible, really good read. In the Dopamine Nation, Dr. Anna talks about that dopamine is like a seesaw. So whatever she goes up, she has to come down to homeostasis. So, for example, 1 glass of wine would increase my baseline. We all have a baseline of dopamine. So my baseline of dopamine, I have 1 glass of wine, and it will increase by 250% from baseline, 1 glass of wine. Not a 250 ml glass of wine, just a little pissy one, or 125. So 250% increase. That dopamine release that I get will last me probably 11 to 13 minutes. That's all. 1 glass of wine, pleasure, 11 to 13 minutes. And then what happens? You can answer this yourself. The brain says to you, I think you need a little top up. You should just go get a little more. So you go and you have 1 more glass of wine. The problem is that dopamine comes in cells that look like caviar. And dopamine doesn't just communicate cell to cell using sodium. She vomits, technical name, vomits, and she fires up the epinephrine system at the same time. So that you've got this burst of pleasure, and it's like, oh my God, that was fantastic. And I've now got the energy because she's released my epinephrine system, my adrenal system is fired, so I've got the energy to go and forage. But the problem is that those caviar cells have completely been depleted, and it might take 40 minutes to an hour for them to fully refill. So if I've had 1 glass of wine in 11 to 13 minutes, I go and have a top up, that capsule only has a tiny little bit of dopamine in it. So it will release again, but it'll be much, much less of a response. So my dopamine response decreases to the same amount of stimulant. So this becomes a cycle of addiction. If you think that 1 glass of wine, I go up 250%, I come to baseline and I drop 250% below baseline within 11 to 14 minutes, then what will happen, I'll have my second glass of wine and it might only come up to just maybe 100% above baseline. So then I seek a third glass of wine because it just doesn't do the same. I need more of it. And when you think of a meth addict, meth, with the response to meth, 1 hit of meth is about 1,000% increase in our dopamine baseline. That meth addict has to drop 1,000% below baseline. Has to. It's science. It's a seesaw. And now the next piece of meth, the next hit of meth, only takes me up to maybe 200%. So I've got to have more meth. I've got to have more drugs. I've got to have more alcohol. I've got to have more gaming. I've got to have more of to try and get the same response. And so this is the addiction. If you think of some other things in your life, I'll give you some percentages. Gaming or social media, depending on the game, because some of them are more stimulating than others, but generally 2 hours of social media or gaming will increase your baseline from about 450% to 650% baseline. So just 2 hours of social media, which is why many of you will have experienced doing a 9:30 p.m, I'm just about to go to bed, I'm just going to check my social media. An hour and a half to 2 hours later, you've gone down the cycle of doom. You've been looking at bulldogs on skateboards and bloody kittens for 2 hours that you'll never get back in your life. And you're like, oh my gosh, it's 11:30 at night now. And now you're going to increase your adrenaline and your cortisol response because you know that you've been stupid. You know that you're not going to sleep well, you got nothing done, you didn't make the lunches, you didn't pack your bags, and you've put yourself into a cycle of stress. It's going to affect your sleep. So dopamine is a really addictive drug and we need to be aware of it. When you take the Wi-Fi off the children and you take a device off and they melt on the floor, some of you will many of you will have experienced this. The child just goes feral, just on the floor it drops. That is not a naughty child, that is a drug addict not having access to the next hit of meth. So never underestimate the addiction cycle that our children are part of. You know, the interesting thing is that if our children or ourselves were alcoholics and we went to the Salvation Army, to one of their islands, to a retreat, and we took a bottle of wine with us, it would be frowned upon. We would be seen as taking our addictive tool with us to a non-alcoholic retreat because we're a recovering addict. If we were a drug addict and we went to a 21-day addiction centre and we took meth with us, it would be frowned upon. But we are social media addicts, we are dopamine addicts from gaming and our phones, yet we go on retreat and we take our cell phones to our bedrooms at our retreat and no one thinks anything of it, but we're just another form of addiction. We are just another form of being an addict. So be really, really aware of the detriment of high levels of dopamine. On the board you'll see I've talked about stacking and linear release, and what I've got down the bottom, you'll see a long line at the bottom, and that talks about my life. So I'm nearly 60, I'm quite old, and in 1960s and 1970s when you were a child, your baseline dopamine was pretty low. You walked home from school barefoot 13 miles in the snow, and you got home and you might have been lucky to get some afternoon tea from your mother, but generally you would have had to perhaps go and feed the cows, or it was a shitty walk home and you were wet, and so your dopamine, actually your baseline would have dropped below baseline. So when you got home and you got afternoon tea, it came back up to its baseline. And then you had your baseline, you went along and you got excited about dinner, but you had to set the table. So then your baseline dropped. And then you ate dinner and it came back up to baseline. And if you were really, really, really lucky, you got to watch MASH on black and white TV for 30 minutes. And you might have got a 100% increase in baseline if you were really lucky. But then you had to do the dishes, so your baseline dropped. So how our whole world was about linear doses, very small ups and downs of dopamine during the 1960s, 1970s, and probably into the 80s. What's happened now, though, is we come home and we will, if we're a child, we'll be given food. We'll have our phone, so we've got the first release from food. Then we've got our phone. Then we'll go gaming. Then we'll watch TV. Then our mother will give us dinner. Mum and dad are sitting at the couch and they've got their glass of wine or their beer. They've got their cell phone. They're eating dinner. They're watching TV, and they might even be working on their laptop all at the same time. So we've got a whole society that's stacking dopamine. So our excesses are higher than we've ever seen before. And when we know that dopamine inhibits the making of melatonin, melatonin's our sleep drug. So high levels of dopamine, high levels of stimulation at the end of the day, you are not going to be making any of your melatonin, your sleep drug. So we're going to end up back into poor sleep cycles. We're going to wake up in the morning and we go back to our norepinephrine release because we didn't get the right deep sleep overnight because of our high levels of dopamine at this end of the day. So I really want you to think about that. Dopamine is released from anticipation, the actual consumption of something or participating in something, and then it fires up again trying to get us to repeat the effort or the thing that produced the dopamine in the first place. It's a really powerful drug, a good drug, but a very, very addictive drug, and it will drive really poor family behaviours and really poor personal behaviours. And in fact, if you think about your cell phone, you think about the workplace, I mean, seriously consider your desk right at the moment. You've got a keyboard, and generally, depending on which is your primary hand, left or right, your cell phone will be sitting pretty close to that keyboard. And what you'll do, you'll be typing away, you'll be working on one of your screens, and you'll be looking at something else. And then this little icon, the little email icon will come up, and you'll be doing some deep thinking on an Excel spreadsheet, but you'll just go and have a look at that email, because it might be, I call it shiny brain syndrome, magpie syndrome. So people are calling it ADHD. There's this huge overdiagnosis, and I don't want to take away from people who genuinely have ADHD. But what we're getting is a whole bunch of people diagnosed by GPs with saying that they have ADHD, and in fact they've just got shiny brain syndrome. It's not a technical term, it's my term. But what it is that my dopamine trail is so high, it's so addictive, I'm just going to touch my screen. Like, I'm just going to touch my screen that's gone black to see if there's any messages, because that's shiny and that's much more interesting than the graph that I'm doing in front of me. So it's really, really important that when we're trying to minimize our dopamine response and our addiction and actually do deep focus work, we not only do we put our phone away, we put our phone, if we're right-handed, in our top left-hand drawer, tucked away, so it's the opposite hand. Put a bottle of water where your phone would normally sit, and every time your body instinctively reaches out for your phone screen, you can pick up your bottle of water and drink some water and replace a poor habit with a good habit. So don't underestimate the power of this drug. It will drive you to do a whole bunch of things. We've got a whole range of tools that can help you start to minimize the effects of dopamine and to start to control it. The thing that we need to be aware of is that we are no longer a society that sits well in boredom. If you think of a doctor's surgery, you think of travelling on the train, there's nobody that sits still and actually just looks out the window. No one just looks at other people. We don't people watch anymore. We all sit in a doctor's waiting room or on the train or on a bus, wherever we are, and our heads are down. We're growing a little spur on the back of our necks because our heads are down all the time, and we're not watching anybody. And we're just addicting, we're just feeding this dopamine. We're just constantly in this dopamine addiction because it's unpleasant to not be stimulated. Children don't know how to be bored anymore. And as soon as they start whining, we fill it in. And in fact, if we've dared to take their phone off them and they get really miserable, not only did we give them their phone back, we give them our phone and say, have your father's phone as well, darling, because you know what, I haven't got the energy. So be really careful. If we take something out, we have to replace it. So if we're going to take the phones off for a night, we're going to have Monopoly, we're going to have a pizza night, and we're going to be building castles in the middle of the lounge. But we're going to be doing something as a family unit that replaces the single addiction, and we've got to get used to discomfort. And discomfort is not being stimulated. And when we are not stimulated, that's when creativity comes. So my takeaways are dopamine addiction is higher than it's ever been at any stage in the history of man. Why? Because we have access to this highly addictive screen and stimulation. When we're on our screens, the other thing to remember that a telephone, that's such an old name, your iPhone, showing my age, your iPhone has got a really, really narrow gaze. So when you're looking at your phone, your vision is really, really narrow. And so that's firing up your norepinephrine, your focus, because it wants you to look at that tiny screen. That's why reading books off a phone are really poor for the brain. It keeps you on a high level of deep concentration of focus, and then it's looking for a dopamine tail to that. So the takeaways, be aware that dopamine will drive you to eat, it'll drive you to drink, it'll drive you to game longer, and it'll be time that you will never get back in your life because it's been wasted on that down the tunnel of doom of social media. So we need to come up with a plan, a strategy at the end of the day to get us and our families off our addiction. We also need to, in our businesses, be really tough, be really, really serious about this as people working at their desk on their social media. That is time that you're paying for them to be working for you. And they're probably wasting 30 to 40% of their day on social media in your paid hours. So you think about that. Everyone goes, I'm overwhelmed. I'm too busy. I've got too much to do. Take their phones off them, and I will absolutely guarantee you'll get 25% productivity back in your day without doing anything else. Not only that, you'll start to moderate their addictive response, their norepinephrine response, their well-being will increase, and they'll have a sense of control. So I'd love you to do some more reading. Both of my books talk about the dopamine addiction and give you some more tools, but it's well worth researching. So motivation, foraging, great drug, highly, highly addictive. Good luck with getting off your phones. As you embark on this fascinating journey into the world of neuroscience and cutting-edge research, I want to ensure that we're on the same page, legally speaking. Firstly, it's essential to clarify that I'm not a qualified neuroscientist, licensed therapist or counsellor. My role is to present you with meticulously sourced information from neuroscientists from around the world, drawing down from their doctorate papers and university research. I've taken the liberty of translating the scientific knowledge into layman's terms and spiced it up with my own unique interpretive dance, because learning should be both fun and actionable. However, please bear in mind that the information and courses provided here are intended solely for educational and entertainment purposes. They are not a substitute for professional medical advice, and I strongly advise consulting qualified health professionals such as physicians, coaches, therapists, psychologists for your personalised guidance. Your well-being is of the utmost importance to me. Therefore, while I strive to deliver intriguing insights, remember that making significant life changes require thoughtful consideration and appropriate guidance. You're invited to venture forth with me on this journey of discovery and growth, armed with knowledge and understanding to enrich our lives in meaningful ways.